James Galante was driving into work one crisp fall morning when he passed a garbage container. Galante, having built his wealth around trash disposal, was no stranger to garbage containers. But this particular one sent his blood pressure skyrocketing. He clinched the steering wheel and sped into work, storming into his office at Automated Waste Disposal. Galante picked up the phone and called his operations manager. Unless he wants a f***ing nightmare, he will get that container out of there. He snarled into the phone. Hanging up, he sat back in his office chair and admired the Soprano photo sitting on his desk. To Jimmy, the real Tony Soprano, it read. That's right, he thought. I am the real Soprano. You see, the problem with the garbage container wasn't the container itself. It was the name emblazoned on the side. J.R. Listocco Karting, a rival company who dared to infringe on his turf. Minutes later, Galante's goon phoned up Listocco Karting, knowing there would be hell to pay if the container wasn't moved immediately. Get that can out of here, or you will be in a world of hurt. We will gouge your eyes out. Listocco removed the can and didn't trespass on Galante's turf again. This is the story of the real-life Tony Soprano, James Galante. Going back to where it all started in 1975, when James Galante was just 22 years old, freshly discharged from his 4-year-long stint in the Air Force, he had a wife and 2 kids to take care of. But Galante had realized while in the Air Force, he didn't enjoy taking orders. As a man who instead wanted to give the orders, he decided to try his hand at running a company. Acquiring a single garbage truck, he began serving the citizens of Danbury. His 1 truck turned into 2, then 3. Galante's burgeoning business soon caught the eye of notorious mobster Matthew Iannello. See, what Galante may or may not have known is that, since the 1960s, organized crime controlled the garbage, also known as carting, business in the New York metropolitan area, including Connecticut. Danbury, located just 70 miles north of New York, was Iannello's territory, and no one was going to establish a garbage business there without his say. Iannello had spent decades establishing a property rights system in the area. If Galante wanted to stay in business, he was going to have to pay to play, to the tune of over $100,000 a year, nearly $500,000 today. A pretty penny, no doubt, but being a part of this property rights organization guaranteed Galante undisputed access to southern and western Connecticut. Thanks to Iannello and the Genovese crime family, once a business was accepted into the system, they were gifted an area to service. As long as they remained in business, surrounding carters had agreed to respect their fellow carters' claim to an account. When solicited by customers, the fellow carting companies would either outright decline to work in the area or provide inflated bids, ensuring they wouldn't get the work. This allowed carting companies to charge their customers inflated prices without the worry of competition, and the customers had no one else to turn to. Any new carting company that dared to compete with the organization was met with threats on their property and life. So Galante gladly handed over the $100,000 a year, a small price to pay for unfettered access to Connecticut's carting business. Now, without competition, Galante's business exploded. Acquiring over 50 trucks and 25 different companies, he was servicing around 80% of the southern and western Connecticut area, as well as Westchester and Putnam counties in New York. But staying on top of his trash empire wasn't easy. Galante had to have help from guys on the inside as well, befriending cops and politicians. When new contracts in the neighboring city of Waterbury caught Galante's eye, he phoned up his buddy, the mayor of Waterbury, Joseph Santipietro. who arranged for Galante to have exclusive rights to the city's trash contracts. A $9,000 payment sent to Assemblyman Willis Stevens was nothing when, on Stevens' recommendation, Galante was awarded a $1.5 million contract in southeast New York. Galante had cops on his payroll as well that would selectively enforce traffic violations on competing garbage companies in the area and use police databases to perform registration searches or run checks to make sure him or his men weren't being secretly investigated. His reach was far and wide, but when politicians and police weren't enough to maintain his reign, Galante had no problem resorting to actual violence, allegedly setting fire to competing trucks, kidnapping drivers by gunpoint, slashing tires over as little as $50. Whatever he had to do, nothing was off limits. He amassed millions and hired many friends and family, giving them handsome wages. His daughter was raking in $50,000 her first year on the job. The only problem was she was just 5 years old at the time, because these jobs Galante so freely handed out are what the IRS would call payroll fraud. No-show jobs, which are exactly as they sound, hiring friends and family as sales managers or secretaries. Yet, they never actually provided any service to the company. This allowed Galante to write off their salaries, healthcare expenses, and perks such as cars on his corporate tax returns. And as Al Capone would tell you, it's never smart to mess with the IRS. Galante held the Connecticut carting business in a chokehold, customers paying inflated prices with no other businesses to turn to, and yet he was still beloved in the community. And for good reason. Galante was a generous donor to the city. When the local hospital was looking to remodel their pediatric ward, the Galante family donated $250,000 of the needed $350,000 to the project. The newly remodeled wing would be named after the gangster and his family. And when the local high school needed its sports complex remodeled, Galante donated $600,000. The state-of-the-art complex christened Galante Stadium. He bought the high school new school uniforms for every sport, set up funds so kids wouldn't have to pay fees to play. Galante donated to the fire departments, schools, and churches. It wasn't hard to see why he was loved. In total, Galante donated over $3 million to the city. Now, whether it was out of the goodness of his heart or an attempt at looking legitimate, as prosecutors would later claim, the generosity couldn't be ignored. So when word spread that Galante was bringing the first sports team to Danbury, the city was ecstatic. Announcement of the team came on April 1st, 2004, and when Galante said he had appointed his 17-year-old son as president, many thought it was an April Fool's prank. Galante's son, an avid fan of hockey, had sustained a career-ending injury that year. Gifting his son the team was Galante's way of making it all better. AJ settled on the name Trashers in honor of Galante's empire and had a friend draw up his mascot, Scrappy the Trash Can. Although many had doubted 17-year-old AJ's ability to lead the team, he took the job seriously and began forming his all-star roster. The only problem he ran into was the United Hockey League's $275,000 salary cap, but AJ let his dad handle those negotiations. Galante employed his no-show job tactics to ensure AJ got the players he wanted, giving players and wives fake jobs at one of his 25 companies, allowing the Trashers to circumvent the salary cap. When AJ's roster was complete, the Trashers' salary ended up being around $750,000, nearly $500,000 more than what was sanctioned. And with his dream team in place, they were set to debut at the Danbury Ice Arena, where Galante had just remodeled the building for over $1 million, installing himself a personal skybox. As the national anthem played overhead, Galante sat like a king on his throne. The first match was about to begin, and he was peering down at the players preparing for battle. Picking up his phone, Galante called down to Brad Wingfield. "When the puck drops, drop your gloves," he instructed. Wingfield obliged. The crowd went wild, and that set the tone for the rest of the season. Fight after fight, the Trashers earned the nickname the Bad Boys of Hockey. AJ's philosophy: it wasn't a match unless there was at least 3 fights, but shortage of fights was never a problem for the Trashers. In one particularly contentious match, Chad Wanger pulled an opposing coach onto the ice, inciting an all-out brawl. He was later banned for life from the UHL. Wingfield, who had grown to be one of Galante's favorite players, had his leg snapped in the middle of a match versus rival Kalamazoo. An irate Galante went down to confront the referee, but unbeknownst to Galante at the time, the ref was a cop in upstate New York. He took a swing at the officer and landed in jail with assault charges, which were later dropped. Trashers' questionable tactics didn't end on the ice, though. The equipment manager, Tony Pomposello, got in on the action as well, soaking the Trashers' jerseys in Crisco so the opposing team couldn't get a good grip, turning off the visiting team's heat in hot water, supplying them with dirty towels that were paper thin, and frustratingly, their equipment would mysteriously go missing. Pomposello was the only equipment manager in UHL history to get suspended. Needless to say, they led the league in penalties, but they were still able to finish first in their division, losing in the playoffs to the Muskegon Fury, who would go on to win the Colonial Cup. They held an extremely loyal fan base, selling out tickets every weekend. The citizens of Danbury couldn't get enough, and in their second season they returned with a slightly revamped team, making it to the finals of the Colonial Cup before losing to the Kalamazoo Wings. The team looked great and were primed for a Colonial Cup win next year. The Galantes were enjoying the high life, kings of their trash empire and now proud owners of the most popular team in Connecticut history. They had no idea that behind the scenes their empire was about to be taken down. Just weeks after the end of the Trashers' second season, FBI descended upon Galante's home and business, serving him with a 98-count indictment, alleged kidnapping, arson, mob ties. Of all the possible things that could have brought down Galante, it was none of those. A simple note, penned 3 years prior, would be the start of his downfall. While in dispute with another trash company, Galante sent the owner a threatening letter, which was then forwarded to the FBI. Soon after, they began their investigation, sending in an undercover agent unknowingly hired by Galante as a salesman. They were able to obtain enough evidence to get wiretap warrants, recording over 50,000 calls from Galante and his associates, where they freely discussed their crimes. In one notable conversation, Galante's associates recalled a trip to New York, where they went to retain the services of a leg breaker known as the Carpenter. Also caught on tape was Galante telling an associate to deliver the message, "Long Island says hello," to a would-be informant, Long Island referring to Matthew Ianello. 3 days after Galante's arrest, his son announced that the Trashers wouldn't be coming back for a third season, much to the dismay of their die-hard fans. But this was the least of the Galante family's worries, as James faced 45 years in prison, a life sentence for the 55-year-old. He watched as the empire he had built over the last 30 years crumbled around him. Galante's partners, accountants, employees, Mayor Santi Petro, and the fellow business owners involved in the property rights scheme were all arrested. The head of the Genovese crime family, Matthew Ianello, was arrested at home while watching The Godfather. In all, 33 men were indicted. The FBI had meticulously crafted its case, and there wasn't anywhere for them to run. One by one, guilty pleas came in from the perpetrators, hoping for leniency. In June of 2008, Galante pled guilty to defrauding the IRS. The government seized his 25 businesses worth an estimated $100 million, and he was sentenced to 7 years in prison, with the vow to never work in the karting industry again. Galante was released in 2014, and he has kept a low profile ever since. His son AJ, having sworn off hockey after everything that happened, now runs a boxing gym and has a podcast on YouTube called Talkin' Trash. They both continue to reside in the Danbury area, and some residents still hope that the Trashers will have a revival.